Call to order the November 13th, 2012 Sioux Falls City Council informational meeting. Welcome everyone who's here in Carnegie Town Hall and those of you watching live on CityLink and on siouxfalls.org. We're glad that you're here this afternoon. Fairly brief agenda, I think, but let's start with staff report. Lori Hogstead, City Clerk.
All right, just a few updates. Our 2013 City Council meeting calendar has now been prepared and is ready. An example of what we have, and we have these calendars over on the table in one of the folders. There's 2012 and 13, so take a look at the date. And then also we have these available on our city's website under www.siouxfalls.org. And if you go to the City Council page, you will find the calendars on the right-hand side. I also wanted to point out that in the multi-purpose room, which is the room just outside of here, we have a new photo over the fireplace. You'll have to take a look at who that might be. Well, I will tell you. It is Andrew Carnegie. And Andrew Carnegie gave the City of Sioux Falls $25,000 back in 1901 to build this particular Carnegie Library at that time. And this photo is on loan to us from the Siouxland Libraries. Joan brought it over and asked if we had a place for it. We have the perfect place. And this was a gift of the Carnegie Corporation of New York, and it's dated 1935. So it's a nice picture. And of course, our Carnegie building update. We're wrapping things up finally. The retaining wall should be completed this week. The contractors are working on the community development and public parking entrance, which is on the east side of the building. And as a result, we have the customers that they have are using our entrances as well as staff, and it's working out just fine. They will put the canopy up the first week in December, and I would hope they would have the door open prior to that, but they may not, and if they don't, that's fine. Lighting should be completed by the end of the month. New fence completed within a couple weeks, and there's just a few punch list items remaining, and best of all, the porta potty will be gone on Friday. So we won't have to look at that anymore. Also, our final manuscript of the recodification that we've been working on for some time has come in, and there is a set in our office, so if anyone from the public would like to take a look or any of the council staff would like to take a look, we have that available for your viewing, and that will come up for first reading on November 20th with second reading on December 4th. And that ends my report.
Great. Questions for Lori? I have one for you, Lori.
Okay.
When they were working on the roof and there was the big truck out here and the parking spaces were taken away.
Yes.
We took 2 parking spots on the street to be handicap parking, and they are still designated as such. I don't want to take them away prematurely, but I would just note to staff that when it's time, those need to be moved again so those meters are available.
Oh, that's true. And you know, we were able to go back to our parking spots, I believe it was last week, and they have now cleared. They did have some construction material in the disabled parking spot, and that has all been removed, so I will remind them to take those signs down. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. Anything else for Lori? Good. Thank you, Lori. Appreciate your report. Jim David, Legislative Operations Manager.
Good afternoon. We are very close to completing a naming rights ordinance, which should be before the Public Services Committee by December 11th. This proposal is actually modeled after the Omaha, Nebraska ordinance and institutes a process for naming city streets, parks, and public facilities. If anybody is interested in viewing a copy of this proposal, please let me know, or has any ideas for what they'd like to see in this ordinance. Please email me or give me a call. Also, Councilor Erpenbach and myself will be meeting this Friday to discuss possible improvements to inside Town Hall with Madeline Shields, Carla Paulson, and Sue Kwan Beck-Etten. We'd also appreciate any ideas for improvements or anything that you actually like about the current program and how it works. And then finally, just a reminder that next Wednesday is the Breakfast Club meeting, and we're going to be discussing tax increment financing, TIFs. So if you haven't RSVP'd, please do so.
Great. Questions for Jim? Councilor Staggers.
Yeah, Jim, I just thought of this. Can the public come to those meetings or not?
The Breakfast Club?
Yes.
They are public meetings and they are open, exactly. Yep.
They're actually kind of interesting, too, so it'd be fun to have other people there. Once in a while, there will be somebody from the public that'll show up randomly, so.
Yeah, free
That's
coffee, pastries,
That's right, yeah.
so.
Oh, now we'll have a jillion people. Thanks. No. Other questions for Jim? All right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your report. Moving on to council open discussion. Items from council. Okay. I'm going to move us along then. We're going into presentations. Introducing the CDC Public Health Fellow, Vanessa Sweeney, by Alicia Kalura. Welcome.
Hi. Good afternoon, Council, and thank you. I am Alicia Kalura, Assistant Public Health Director. And this afternoon, I'm pleased to introduce to all of you Vanessa Sweeney. She comes to us from the CDC, and she's a Public Health Prevention Management Fellow. This program that the CDC has is twofold. One, it helps create highly skilled public health managers, but also it spreads public health capacity throughout the United States. And the process to obtain a fellow in your organization or your public health facility is to first write a project proposal. Second, we did a series of phone interviews, and then finally we did a face-to-face interview to see if there was a match for the health department. It's a highly competitive process. Over 115 organizations applied, and there were 23 placements altogether. And also the CDC pays the salary and the benefits for the fellow, so it's also a financial win for our community. We were notified in July that we did have a match with Vanessa, and she began her project in October. She has a strong resume. She has a master's in public health. She also has several years of public or program management experience. And she also is an award winner in several areas, including Rookie of the Year for Emerging Leaders of 2009 for the Council for Community Behavioral Health Care, and this is a national recognition. While Vanessa is here, her primary focus will be to work with our environmental team and our code enforcement team. We know that through reports that you've received that our code enforcement team has a high level of success in mitigating complaints in our community through the citation process and voluntary compliance. I think it's nearly 90 or over %. But there are people in our community that have a variety of life stressors that also influence their ability to maintain their property. And so what Vanessa will be here looking at is to see if there's linkages between any behavioral health issues and a person's ability to maintain their property and be a good neighbor. And we just want to create more linkages, more referrals, more community connections, and see if there's anything we can do on the prevention side. She's been with us now for the past month, and she's done a lot of shadowing and interviewing with city staff, with social service agencies, with our public safety officers. She's also making great connections in the community. An example is South Dakota Multi-Housing Association has had several conversations with her. And so far, everyone has been really excited to have her in our community and just put another set of eyes on some of the processes that we have, and if we can help our residents in any way. So with that, I'll just ask her to come up and introduce herself to you.
Great, Vanessa. Thank you. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name's Vanessa Sweeney. I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be here. I've been in Sioux Falls for about a month now, and I came from Atlanta, and I'm originally from New Jersey. So I will say that this is one of the most welcoming communities I've lived in thus far. And it's great because some of my passions is community, but also mental health and substance abuse, and how to leverage community resources to help the downtrodden, those that are the indigent populations, those that might not necessarily have a voice normally. And so I'm really excited to work with code enforcement and with the health department as well as with the city to try to do a needs assessment. I think will be the first step in terms of what do we have here and what resources do we have that maybe we're not even leveraging as much as we can, as well as if there's anything else that we need to really be able to come together and help people and access the services that are necessary. So I just wanted to say thank you again, and I'm happy to be here.
Good, welcome. Thank you, Vanessa. Questions for Vanessa or for Alicia? Well, I've already seen Vanessa on the Public Works tour. She rode the bus with some of us, so she's getting out there, and we're glad to see you here. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Alicia. Thanks. Moving on to our next presentation, the October monthly report by Tracie Turbek, Director of Finance.
Good afternoon, everyone. Tracie Turbek with Finance Office. Before I run through my slides, I did want to mention to you, if you haven't noticed it yet, the written report is in your inbox. Went out this morning in an email. And normally, I would try to have that out to you further in advance of me being here giving a presentation. Because originally I was scheduled to be here next week with this presentation, with scheduling conflicts and so forth. We couldn't have anybody here next week, so we cranked the report out a little quicker and at least got it out a little bit in advance of this presentation. So, and I do want to thank my team for doing that. They worked pretty hard to get it out by this morning to give you at least a little bit of an opportunity to look it over. But with that, and of course, you certainly don't have to limit your questions to today. I'm always available for questions if you want to stop by for a cup of coffee or shoot me an email or pick up the phone. I'm always happy to try to answer your questions. So I'll run through some of the economic indicators that we do track, talk a little bit about the general fund, and then wrap it up with what we have as our kind of our year-end projection, where we think we're going to end up 2012. Things continue to look very, very favorably in our local economy. Unemployment, of course, is one of the very key indicators that we do follow, and you can see in this slide that our local unemployment here is very good. The most recent data we have is for September. The Sioux Falls MSA had an unemployment rate of 3.7%. which is slightly lower, about 0.2 lower than it was a year ago at this time, and about 0.7 of a point lower than it was 2 years ago. But I think the slide really shows you what's been happening here the last couple of years. The blue line is 2010, and the red line is 2011, and of course the green line is 2012. And each year we've been getting progressively stronger in terms of our employment. And you might think of that or look at this in the context of what you may have been hearing recently in the news about the national unemployment rate and that being significantly higher. But consider, I'm no economist, but you hear economists on TV talking about a normal level of unemployment nationally being 6%. So certainly Sioux Falls is a very hot market right now in terms of the employment, high level of employment and low level of unemployment. So that certainly bodes well for our local economy and our local businesses. The second slide, of course, you've seen before. This is the year-to-date value of building permits that have been issued by our Building Services Department. Now, sometimes I run through these fairly quickly and really don't take enough time maybe to explain the chart itself, but this is a cumulative graph. So starting at the beginning of the year, January's data is for the month of January only, and as we go through the year, each month builds on itself, and so February is a total of January and February data, so that by the time we get to the end of the year, the bottom of the graphic, December, we see a full year's worth of data. And I might point out, in comparing the historical information here, 2011 with 2010, a couple messages in this graph. One, last year, you can see for the first, comparing the red line and the blue line, which are 11 and 10, for much of last year, 2011 data was running behind 2010, so the level of activity just was not keeping up with where it had been even in 2010. By August of last year, we were pretty even. The year-to-date value of permits had pretty much caught up to where it had been in 10. And then for the remainder of the year, 11 picked up the pace a little bit and ended the year, as you can see, in December with a modest increase over 2010. When we start adding on the green line for the current year, 2012, you can see that we're seeing some real striking growth rates in our building permit activity. And in fact, by August of 2012, we had already surpassed the value of permits issued for all of 2011. So anything from August through the end of the year is really growth in our building permit activity. Through October, the total number of permits or value of permits issued is about $382 million. That's about 49% ahead of where we were October last year. So what started out as a very strong growth rate has really held up surprisingly well, I think, late into the construction season. Just some specific numbers I might throw out. The housing market is particularly strong. A lot of building activity in housing. The number of single-family units through October is up by 2% over 2011. Multifamily units are up 36%. Townhome units are up 51%. And as I mentioned, the total value of all the permits are up 49%, including housing is up 49%, or about $62 million over last year. So quite a striking tale, I think, that tells about the level of activity in our community. Next couple of slides, as is typical, are in sales tax. This is a chart that shows our general sales tax. Really, our first penny and our second penny are reflected here in terms of the growth rate. They do both apply to all the same transactions, so they mirror one another when we're looking at growth rates and the amount of dollars that are generated by those first two pennies. We're still seeing some very, very solid growth in our sales tax revenues. The rolling 12-month growth rate through October is at 5.2%. So for the 12 months ended in October, we're running at a 5.2% growth rate. 1 year ago, that was at 5.1%. So it's stayed quite stable over the past year. 2 years ago at this time, it was under 1%. So we've seen a drastic increase or improvement from late 2010 through the spring of 2011. And in fact, since the spring of 2011, it's really been hovering around 5% growth, a little bit above at times, a little bit below at times. So very stable, very solid growth rate that really reflects what's happening in our general retail economy. This next slide focuses really just on our entertainment tax, which is often referred to as our bed, board, and booze tax, is applied to far fewer transactions, just for those purchases of those unique items that fall under this tax. But you can see the growth rate is even stronger here. It's currently running at 6.9% on a 12-month rolling basis, and that's significantly stronger than sales tax collections in general. And I think I know that some of you have mentioned to me, and I certainly find this kind of indicative of what people are spending their discretionary dollars on, or some of those things that, when things do get tight, might be some of the first things. Not for me necessarily, but for a lot of people, would be the first things they cut out of their household budget are some of these discretionary items, and we're seeing this grow at almost 7% right now. So that's a good indicator, one, for our visitor industry, and certainly the level of discretionary dollars I think that a lot of our residents feel like they have in their household budgets as well. So I think it's, again, a very positive indicator of our local economy. Next, I want to look at the general fund. This is a kind of a side-by-side view of general fund revenues and expenditures, each one on a year-to-date basis. The revenues are running very consistently and have been all year, slightly ahead of the 2011 figures on a year-to-date basis. And through October, our revenues in the general fund have grown at a rate of 7.4%. So we're seeing good solid growth in our general fund revenues. Looking at the expenditure side, throughout 2012. It's been pretty consistently running ahead, slightly ahead, or even with 2011 on a year-to-date basis, so very much in line with what we've expected as part of our budget. Expenditures through October have grown at 3.4% when compared with the first 10 months of last year. So it's always a positive thing when we can report that our expenditures are growing at a rate that's slower than our revenues are growing. So that's, again, a very positive thing for the city budget. Following the completion of the 2013 budget, which you folks adopted in September, one of the things the finance team focused on is to update our projections for 2012. Once we get the 2013 budget plan in place, we go back to the 2012 year and update our projections for where we think we're going to end 2012. So in doing that, we work with the departments, get a better feel for what they think they can complete through the end of 2012, and then we, of course, update our revenue projections as well. As I just mentioned to you a minute ago, the general fund revenues are running ahead of budget. Expenditures are expected to end the year slightly under budget. And so our projections indicate that we won't be using any fund balance for 2012. The original budget included, as the slide indicates, anticipated the use of about $3.8 million in unreserved fund balance. So that's certainly a positive outcome of our revenues growing faster than our expenditures when we compare it to last year. So we anticipate no use of fund balance for 2012. Now, this is a projection, but the one thing I can guarantee you about it is that it's wrong. Just don't know how wrong it will be. Anybody that can make these kind of projections with absolute certainty is blowing smoke up your pant leg, I think. But we feel pretty confident that we will end out the year in a very favorable situation. Some of the things that to watch for, of course, our local retail economy is going to have to remain strong for this to be an accurate forecast. And then, of course, we're always subject to the weather and the variations in the weather. So far, we've had a very favorable fall. Haven't spent much money on snow removal, and if that holds up, we'll be in very good shape. And frankly, this kind of a break-even year is really right where I'd like to see us. I mean, that's where we should be, is breaking even. We're not we've got strong reserves, so we're not looking to continue to accumulate more reserves, but yet it's certainly not a sustainable thing to use reserves to support our day-to-day operations. So break even and no use of fund balance is a very good place for us to end the year. This would be leave us within, well above the council's 25% policy limit as well. As you folks know, the council has a policy target of 25% of our budgeted expenditures is what you'd like to see in reserves at the end of the year. And based on this projection, we will end the year at about 34%. So we should be in very, very favorable shape. A couple other things I'd like to mention before I wrap it up and see what kind of questions you have today. I want to mention one item that's on your council agenda for tonight is a second reading and adoption of a supplemental budget ordinance for the debt service costs associated with the event center. I just wanted to point out that that is about $4.25 million, which is right in line with what we had anticipated when the council adopted the capital plan for 2012. So that's coming in right where we expected it to be, and just as we've said it would be all along. The other thing I wanted to mention, something you'll see on one of your future agendas, is a supplemental appropriation ordinance related to the transit fund. Now, the transit fund is a separate fund, separate and apart from our general fund, so this won't impact the general fund in any way. But the transit fund maintains its own cash balance, and there are sufficient dollars in the transit fund to handle this, and it's associated. The need for the supplement is associated with the settlement of their labor contract that you folks heard about earlier this year. So, again, that's something you'll hear more about on a future council agenda at a future meeting. But I did want to assure you that the transit fund itself is certainly in a good financial position to accommodate that supplement. So with that, I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you folks have.
Great, thank you, Tracie. Questions from council? Councilor Staggers.
Tracie, taking a look at the charts with revenue and expense, it looks like on the chart that the revenue in October is like in the 80 million, but then the expenses look like they're in the 90 million. Why is that the case?
Well, there are months when expenditures do exceed revenues. Of course, these are year-to-date. So far for 2012, the general fund has seen expenditures exceed revenues.
Yeah.
But for the balance of the year, we expect that to flip around, and that deficit will actually disappear. So one of the major reasons for that is in November we get our second half property tax collection. So that's a big chunk of revenue that comes in very late in the year.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Councilor Rolfing.
Yeah, Tracie, the building permits, how much of the new event center is in those building permits? I think there isn't that much yet in there.
There really isn't. Good question, though, and that's a lot of people ask that when they see those numbers because they almost believe that it's got to be have a lot to do with the event center. And reality is there's about $4.1 million of the event center that's been permitted through the end of October. So it's really not much of a blip out of almost $400 million of activity permitted.
You have any idea when most of that is going to hit? Is it going to be in 2012 or is it going to be in 13?
I think that remains to be determined yet. It just depends on how quickly things progress, and I suppose maybe to some degree what the weather is and that allows them to progress.
Okay.
I think there will be some more permitted yet this year. I just can't say for sure how much.
Councilor Jameson.
Thank you. A couple of questions. Tracie, the year started off with the entertainment tax at like 4.5%, and now it's up to 7 or so, real close. I know we put our budget together on the first penny and the second penny, but what is happening and how much money are we talking about what happens to the extra money and that entertainment tax? And just refresh me on where all that goes,
Okay.
and if there's extras over and above what our debt services may be obligated to, then what happens?
Sure. The entertainment tax is a separate fund, so it's isolated and isn't mixed with the general fund or the capital fund or any of that. So any dollars that come in that don't get spent out of the entertainment tax remain in that entertainment tax fund and then are used to help fund the next year's budget. So if we continue to run at over 6%, we will certainly see revenues come in significantly higher than the 3% that we budgeted. Although keep in mind the entertainment tax is significantly narrower tax and doesn't generate the kind of revenues that our first penny does. But so those dollars will remain in there to help support whatever we might want to do in the future in terms of our entertainment venues. As you folks know, the entertainment tax is used to support the convention center, the Washington Pavilion, the arena, and the Orpheum Theater. So,
In those couple of those bonds are going to be set to finish off here in just a couple of years, right?
That's correct. The bond issue that was sold a number of years ago for the pavilion and the convention center will be retired here in the next couple of years. So we'll see those dollars that are currently going to make bond payments free up in there as well.
Sorry, this is leading me
Go
further,
ahead.
but the decision on spending that entertainment tax dollars would be up to us to decide if we wanted to reallocate it towards debt service, say on the event center. We could do that,
I suppose you could.
or whatever we decided.
I think it would be, of course, the bonds are secured with the second penny dollars, but that would be a legal permitted use for those dollars. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then one last question, if I could. The this fiscal cliff that is out there, that the federal government's going to have to make some changes, and we rely on them for a lot of support. And I know we've talked about it in the past on how many dollars do we rely on them, and in which programs. And are you ready, and are you kind of tuned up for any? I mean, certainly we all might have to change the way we do things, but are you ready?
We don't have any specific crystal ball as to what cuts might come from the federal budget. Certainly those departments that are more dependent than others, namely the health department and community development are two departments that are most dependent or most involved with federal funding, and those folks do stay pretty well in tune with what's going on with their particular program.
The only one I could say is that the transit department, the transit system is, I mean, all those other things could probably somewhat be diluted in services, but the transit system, if we had to change and pay for our full share, it would substantially change the way we operate our government and fund things. I know we've talked about it, that's all. I don't want it to be forgotten that it's looming out there, and we should probably have either a contingency plan or at least thought about it before it happens.
Well, that's certainly one of the reasons we like to maintain solid reserves in our general fund, is that if there are unanticipated things that happen like that, if that were to happen, then we're in a position where we've got some options that we can consider as to how to proceed forward. In some people's minds, I guess you can never have enough money in reserves because the number of bad things that could potentially happen are endless, I suppose. But at the same time, you have to maintain an appropriate, what you folks consider to be an appropriate balance. So certainly something we'll stay tuned into, and with any luck at all, they'll make some decisions here without delaying things too much longer.
Great. Thank you, Tracie. Councilor Karski.
Tracie, whenever we receive these reports, they always say without audits. Why is that important to point out, and what impact could there be? I'm sure you've told me before, but if you don't mind refreshing my memory.
Of course, the audits that are referred to there are audits that are done by the State Department of Revenue they go out and audit vendors and retailers. And sometimes they'll go out and do an audit and decide the business person has underpaid their sales tax. And so we will get an additional check from the state. Other times they'll do an audit and determine that the vendor overpaid, and we'll actually have a credit, so they withhold that from our next payment. So those are the audits that we're referring to, that where actual businesses are audited by the State Department of Revenue, because all that money flows through from the vendor to the Department of Revenue back to the city. So that's how we get the money. The reason we take it out of the slide showing the growth rate on sales taxes is because when we get that, we don't know if that relates to 2011. When we get for example, if we get an extra payment from the state as a result of an audit, they don't tell us who the vendor is. They don't tell us if it's one vendor or 10. They don't tell us. We don't know if that's from 2011, from 2010, from 2009, or all of the above. So we want to take it out of here to really kind of filter that out so that we get a clearer picture of what our current economic activity is in the city. So we take those out. Even though when we look at whether or not we're meeting our sales tax budget, we certainly want to include those dollars, and you see that in the report. I don't know what it is, page 7, I believe, in the report where we give the breakdown on sales taxes. But you can, and we show that how much has come in on audits on a separate line there. I'm sorry, it's page 3. So you can see that the current collections are kind of listed by month, and then at the very bottom you can see the state audit collections and adjustments. So it's certainly important revenue that we want to track and need to track. Those are dollars coming into our general fund and our capital fund, and in some cases the entertainment tax fund. So we want to track those dollars, but engaging the economic activity, they just tend to skew things.
Is there any potential for a wide variation? I mean, would any impact that could be severe in these cases, or is it pretty minor when it
Typically they're minor, although they can certainly change the numbers, change the growth rate if we include those.
Okay. Thank you.
There are times on rare occasions when they will be six-figure adjustments. So I mean, could be several $100,000. Those are unusual, and hopefully we don't get too many of those.
You know, if I
Yes,
might
Councilor
add,
Edgman?
as a retailer who has had several sales tax audits in his career. I can tell you the state is extremely aggressive in making sure that they're collecting the revenues that they are deserving of. You have to remember, property tax and sales tax is what funds our state government, and that's the bulk of where we get our dollars. So they are extremely aggressive in watching that and making sure that they're getting the revenues that they're entitled to. Not only do they do sales tax audits on the retailers in this state, but if you do business outside of this state, they're making sure that those businesses that are collecting sales tax outside of this state are submitting the appropriate funds to the state too. So it's a very complex and it's a very aggressive part of our government. Trust me.
The voice of experience.
So that is why typically when I send out the monthly report in my email, kind of the cover letter, so to speak, that goes with that, I'll typically quote 2 growth rates to you. One without the audits, which I think is a better economic indicator, but then also the what is currently a 6.3% growth over 2011 on our bottom line total revenues, including all that information, all those audit adjustments. So you can see it both ways, how we're doing against our budget and how we're doing on the local economic side.
Any other questions or comments on that topic? Any other questions or comments for Tracie? I think we're good. Thank you very much. Appreciate your report. Moving on to City Council's budget update. Dave Bixler, Budget Analyst.
Good afternoon. So I'm going to be presenting the October year-to-date spending for the budget, or for the council. Overall, looking at the City Council's total spending, came in at $79,000 for October. That put us at 67% to date for the year. And really, we're at 83% of the years completed, so we're running well under budget. You can see the different departments within the City Council and where they're running at. Internal audit at $20,000 for the month at 71%. City Clerk 37.4 at 54.4% of the budget in City Council. The spending was $22.1 thousand at 90% of the budget. Breaking it down further, this is the labor and benefits. For the October spending, the internal audit was $20,000, and that was 98% of their total monthly spending. City Clerk had $26,000 in labor and benefits spending, which was 69% of their spending for the month, and City Council was at $19,000, 87% of the monthly spending. And you can see at 2012 budget compared to 2013 budget, the adjustments we're making for the staff. We have the Legislative Operations Manager going to be in the City Council department, and so will I, the Budget Analyst. And also to note that internal audit will be fully staffed. So the City Council's other operating spending versus a budget. In October, the City Clerk had $11.4 thousand spent, and it was mainly due to Highland Software, which was formerly Sire, and then also our legal publications, the Argus Leader. City Council had $2.8 thousand spent, and it was due to the Bournes Group for the texting ban mailer and mileage and phone charges. Looking at 2012 to 2013 budget, this is where we're really seeing the significant reduction in our spending. Professional services at $91,000, elections, $47,000 we had budgeted in 2012, we do not have in 2013, and travel and training at $15,000 reduction from the prior year budget.
Great.
Questions?
Questions for Mr. Bixler? Councilor Staggers.
In regard to the texting ban mailer, I guess I'm not, can you say something about that?
There was an insert that went in with the billing, I think it was the water billing, and it was just a little notification saying about the ban.
Why would we do that, the city council? Why not some office over in the administration do that? Why did we do it? Because some council members wanted to, or?
Comments?
Don't have an answer.
Yeah.
There are mailers that come from council on a periodic basis. Sometimes they list our names and phone numbers. This one had the texting ban on it.
Yeah, because I don't remember, has the council done this before? I don't.
We've done it for elections.
Yeah, I can understand that for
we've done it,
elections.
but for a public notice, I'm not aware of any.
Okay. How is that authorized?
Honestly, it just was done.
Okay.
You know,
I think I know how it was, but
in the course of business, the way that we do any other mailer that we've done, that's just how it went.
okay.
Other comments or questions for Mr. Bixler? Great, thank you very much. Anything else for the informational session? Reminder that we don't have a committee meeting following this. Public Services did not have agenda items tonight, so we are adjourning now until 7 o'clock this evening.